Welcome to Swingopedia. We are so excited and proud to hear from the daughter of the famous Al Minns, as seen on Hellzapoppin, Hot Chocolate, and an amazing Savoy ballroom dancer. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are so excited to hear from the daughter of Al Minns, Denise Minns-Harris.
Hello.
Excellent.
It's great to be here.
So, welcome to Swingopedia. Can I just ask you to tell the people your name and who you are and where you're from?
Sure. My name is Denise Minns-Harris. Right now, I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles, California. I'm the daughter of Al Minns, and I grew up in New York City.
Fantastic. One of the things I wanted to establish is, are you a dancer?
Yes. I grew up dancing with my dad. And then as I continued, I also began to train in modern and Horton and Graham and African, and kind of drifted away from Lindy, although I did perform with my dad twice in New York. And before I forget, I want to say, my dad never called himself a Lindy Hop dancer. He called himself a jazz dancer because he danced many vernaculars of swing era. He didn't just see himself as a Lindy dancer, although he did a lot of that. But he also did a lot of other things. I have his performance sheet from his show, and there's like 16 different pieces he performed. Everything from the cakewalk all the way to the twist. And yeah, so I just wanted to make people understand it was bigger for him than Lindy, which kind of feeds into some other stuff we're going to talk about later.
Excellent. So you mentioned that you performed with your dad. How old were you at that point?
I was like 11 and 12, you know, dancing with him. I started dancing with him as soon as I could walk, because wow, that's what happens. That's what happens when you're a child of a dancer. They put your feet on their feet and you just start dancing. And, but of all my siblings, I was the one who took to dance the most. Because I asked my older sister, Tony, recently, I asked her, I said, where were you when Papa and I were dancing all the time? And she said, Denise, the music would go on and either you or Dad would say, come on, let's go. And she said, I'd just be there clapping because it was you two. So I had the greatest affinity for it. And even after I stopped actively training and performing, I was with I was one of the directors at the Debbie Allen Dance Academy for its first 15 years to work towards making that a global, internationally renowned dance institute as well. So I've never left the dance world entirely.
At what point, so you've danced with your dad, but at what point did you realize how important or influential he was to the jazz dance and Lindy Hop scene? Because you can be someone's family, but not actually realize how big they are outside the family home.
Yeah, that's a ironic story. You know, I mean, the first time I saw Hellzapoppin, I saw it on TV sitting next to him, you know. So, and that kind of like blew my mind. Like, oh, my dad's on TV, you know, and then I would see him periodically on different television shows. So, but having him as a dancer, traveling the world, for me was normal. Like other people's dads got up and, you know, took their lunch pail and went to work and were home every day by 5. And, you know, I'm waking up knowing that today my dad's in Nigeria, or today my dad's in Brazil, or today my dad's in France. And then he would come home and regale me with stories of how people lived in other countries. So what seemed, in your terms, you know, this famous influential person, in my terms, it was just dad, you know, like it was just dad getting the invitation in the mail to come to Duke Ellington's birthday party. I mean, it was just dad, you know. So the impact I didn't realize until my second born, Kevin, contacted me and said, Mom, some people are going to be reaching out to you to go to Sweden. Are you interested? I said, why do I want to go to Sweden? And then we started talking. And I remembered my dad had called me back in the 80s. Kevin had recently been born. And he's like, Denise, you won't believe it. These people came from Sweden and they're bugging me to come over there and teach them how to dance. And, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. And I said, you're not doing a whole lot of anything else right now. Why not go? And he said, oh, I'm going to be there a whole month. I'll leave you the contact information. If I don't come home, come get me. I'm like, okay, that's a deal. And when he came back to the States, he called me and he was absolutely elated, absolutely in joy that this art form that he had devoted his entire life to, was being recognized and was being sought after in Europe. And he told me all about this thing that's going to be evolving and how he was looking forward to it. And that's when I realized, hey, there's something different going on. But then it was decades later that I got the invitation. I went to Harang and I saw the global impact and influence he's had. Because as you know, or you may not know, a few months after he returned, he said to me in that phone call, he's like, you know, my throat's bothering me. And, you know, my dad was a bit of an alley cat. So I said, Dad, I don't know what you've been doing over there, but you better go see the doctor because I don't know what they got going on. And it turned out he had esophageal cancer and he died a few months later, but he died having completed his life with a sense of victory. Because it troubled him deeply that when he was teaching in New York, there wasn't a lot of interest among young Black people to come and learn the Lindy Hop. And it's interesting because he gave it a lot of thought and we talked about it because once like the twist came out, people stopped dancing together.
Yes.
And in the States, our dance greatly, particularly with Black people, greatly follows what's going on with us culturally, you know. So, and then again, there was a lack of exposure to the music. And again, you know, the music that attracted him, that made him the swing dancer was swing music. And so as that began to dive out, it left its position in the contemporary mainstream. So this return was just ecstatic to him.
So he went to Sweden. That was late 80s, early 90s?
84.
84. So that's 1984. That at the time, hip hop was huge. That would have been the dance. I remember myself spinning on my back. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And so coming back from there, you say it wasn't long after since he developed the cancer.
Right. Well, he obviously had it while he was there, but the most wondrous thing is to watch my father's face when he's dancing. I know as dancers, our inclination is to watch his feet and his arms and his hips and what's going on, but his face, because in his face, you see absolute joy, absolute joy. Uh, and that's initially where I look when I'm watching him dance, at the absolute joy in his face. That is not an act. And I believe that the joy of what he was experiencing um, gave him the energy and the drive to instruct. And I think, there was a part of him, consciously or subconsciously, that knew this was his shot to complete what he was on this earth to do. I believe that.
Let's take things right back to the early years. You mentioned that you'd seen him go and perform a number of things, including the cakewalk. And at the time, you can see in books like Stern, where they mention Al and Leon and so forth, that many of the times whites would perform cakewalking minstrels, and sometimes the black performers would also have to white up and black up to get the work. Did your dad ever have to do that? Has he ever talked to you about those things?
No. After his partner Leon died, he created a lecture demonstration about the history of Black dance in America. And so he would begin with the cakewalk. And he talked about how, the cakewalk was the slaves making mockery of the slave owners as they delivered the cakes to them after dinner when they had all their guests. And their inside joke was that the slaves didn't even know they were the slave owners did not know they were being mocked. And then he traced what was going on all the way up to the twist. And then he would end it with the twist.
I think we've seen that.
By the way, I don't think my father, knowing him, not even for the money, would have put on blackface.
I think there was a number of people who flatly refused around that time, as soon as it got to the 40s. Let's stick to that time period again. The Savoy Ballroom is often painted as the place where blacks and whites would dance, and the home of the happy feet. But did he ever give an indication as to whether there was actually racism existed there? Was it a case of the whites were invited in, or they came in, or did they give any indication of the feeling and the atmosphere at that time? Because it would have been during the period of segregation still, Jim Crow laws.
Yeah, Black performers, if I'm to use my dad as what informs me, they saw what the landscape was in this regard, and they had a choice to be angry and rebellious, for want of a better term, or to power through. So even though they saw what the circumstances were, what they wanted to do was dance. So they powered through, and where they needed to suck it up, they sucked it up and danced and did whatever they needed to do. And I don't care if it was, Al Minns at the Savoy, or, Ella Fitzgerald having to come in through the back entrance, at the Cotton Club. I mean, you powered through because whatever it was better than it was. Even though by today's measurement, it was a nightmare, and how could you have put up with that? But by their measurement, they were taking care of their families. Their families were eating. Their families had heat in the cold. And so they powered through. As not to get too political, but as people in this country, that's what we became masters of. Checking out the climate, figuring out the rules, powering through and winning to the best of our ability under the circumstances we were faced with.
Maybe not as extreme. I guess we're all still powering through today. We can see your dad, Al Minns, with Leon James featuring heavily in Moira Den's documentary, The Spirit Moves. What are your thoughts on that? Did he ever talk about it?
First of all, when he was dancing, he didn't know at that time what we've come to see him in with the Martha Graham bottom on, with the Horton bottom on, which someone asked me what was with the diaper, and I said, okay, that just shows how much other vernaculars of dance you're not aware of, because that was how modern dancers were dressing at the time. That was the technique they were representing at the time. And he didn't know he was being recorded. The music was playing and he just went with it. And he was feeling it and he was loving it, and they kept it. And beyond that, we never really talked about it other than, yeah, they recorded it and they liked it, so they're gonna go with it. You know, it's not one of my favorites, although again, watching his face and his joy in just expressing himself improvisationally, I love that. But of course, like everyone else, my favorite is Hellzapoppin.
Again, coming back to The Spirit Moves, you can see him doing all amazing jazz, doing the cakewalk with Betsy Bethel and Leon. I mean, this was a font of knowledge for us to use as a source of all the key jazz routines that they had in those days. You know, so that was, you know, how do you feel about your dad being a font of knowledge and being the, I guess, the go-to or the encyclopedia from that documentary?
He never looked at himself as the creator that he really was. You know what I mean? Because as a dancer, it's feast or famine, you know? And so he would have these long periods of working and being, you know, respected for his contribution and sought after for his contribution. And then there'd be long periods of famine where there was nothing happening. So his ability to bask in the glory, if you will, it never presented itself. You know, one of the things he used to say is, you know, they're not going to let many of us in no matter what we do. They're only going to allow, and they meaning that those who control everything in the arts, you know, they would have, you know, their pick. And I don't want to name names because I don't want to detract from them having had that opportunity to be at the top. But he didn't, I feel, he didn't see that kind of recognition during his lifetime as an ongoing sustaining process. So he never expressed anything about it. So you get Bojangles and you get the Nicholas brothers, but there were many other amazing, breathtaking, you know, dancers who didn't get that spotlight. So then you have these Lindy Hoppers who were dancing in the movies until white kids learned how to do it. And then they became who gets used in the movies, and the Black Lindy Hoppers who created this art form no longer get the work. I met a white woman at one of the Lindy festivals who was being honored as an icon for having been in those movies. And the person interviewing her kept looking at me during the interview because I was sitting in the audience. And she said, oh, I'm sorry I seem distracted, but Al Minns' daughter's in the audience. And the woman, you know, who was being honored was like, oh, and she got all excited. And she said right from the front of the stage, she said, you know, until I met Frankie Manning, I thought white people created the Lindy Hop. I mean, this is, and she's from my father's era. And not to take away from her, she was a dancer, but she wasn't a creator.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
She wasn't a creator. She just danced well, and good for her. But for me, it was like you learning that dance robbed the creators of work.
Yes.
And you know, I can't even be upset with you because you didn't even know
Absolutely.
where it came from. You know, so it's just ignorance and you know, the distortion of our history once again.
Well, this is what we're trying to solve here with Swingopedia in Europe, because believe it or not, in 2020, I think it was even a few years ago, there was one particular country where there were so many dancers, it built up, and the teachers that were going there never actually talked any history. So even in the age of YouTube, they didn't have any time to look at the historic clips. They just looked at the latest competitions, which were all white. So we had to try and educate them to say, hey, this is where the dance comes from.
I think it's deeper than they didn't have time. What's worse is they didn't have inclination.
Yes, I'm being diplomatic.
You're being diplomatic.
Yes.
I'm not diplomatic.
No. So have you seen the Alan Leon Shim Sham?
Of course.
Have you danced to Alan Leon Shim Sham?
Of course, when I was a kid with my dad.
And have you? How do you feel that these days that most people are doing the Leonard Reed version of the Shim Sham as opposed to the Alan Leon version?
You know, I've met Leonard Reed. I've been to like 9 or 10 tap festivals here in Los Angeles. Originally led by Jason Samuel Smith and Chloe Arnold, later Jason and then Chloe. And you know, the Shim Sham is a celebration. You know, you know, it just tells the story in technicolor of swing, in my opinion, i.e. When you do ballet, there's only one way to do tendu. There's just one way to do tendu at the bar. That's it. There's one correct way. The beauty of swing is that there's no correct way. And so when my dad did the Shim Sham, he did it as a version of swing. He didn't do it as a tap dance per se. So you'll see him break into the Charleston or the snake hips right in the middle of it, because that's who he was, you know, and that's how he danced. And that's the level of freedom that he exhibited in dancing that, quite frankly, this art has lost. You don't see that kind of freedom of expression anymore. Even in the social dancing, it's become very codified and rules of, you know, straight back, bent back, stop. That's not what it was supposed to be.
Are there any stories as to why and how the Alan Leon Shim Sham was created?
No, and I'm not surprised there aren't, because it was the love of dance, you know, and I don't even believe they would consider it the Alan Leon Shim Sham. They would consider it Alan Leon doing the Shim Sham, because they did the Shim Sham as swing dancers as opposed to tap dancers. Does that make any sense to you, what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So whatever they did, they bought it, they absorbed it and expanded it based on the vocabulary of dance that they had in their lives, in their body. You know, I've seen the Leonard Reed Sham many times, and it's fun to watch. It's fun to do. And I don't think either are in competition. I think my dad gives you permission to do more, to break out of the box, to free your creativity and stop dancing by rules created by somebody else, because they just inhibit you and choke the art. Free up. It's so important because it's dying. This art, the creativity that should be just percolating and bubbling and spilling all over the place, it's not. It's I hear, particularly women dancers, I've heard them, bemoan the fact that if they do something improvisational on the floor that, their partner wasn't ready for, it's like they committed a major crime. What? That's crazy. That is not. That may be some stuff from the Arthur Murray Ballroom School of Lindy Hop, but that is not the Savoy Ballroom School of Lindy Hop. So what you want to be about?
So we've seen Al Minns and Leon James performing together many times. They've been in the Ed Sullivan show. They're mentioned in Stearns' books and videoed so many times. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between the two of them?
They were like brothers. They were very, very close. They both had white wives, for whatever that's worth. I remember as a child, even when they weren't appearing or rehearsing, we would get together as families and have dinner. And I didn't observe their friendship as much because Leon had daughters, my dad had daughters, and so we were off and playing and hanging out and talking clothes and dolls, whatever. And they were always in the room, in the living room, talking music and playing records and ultimately getting up and dancing. And, my mom and Leon's wife, Hazel, would be in the kitchen. I mean, it was like family. They were very close. It was devastating to him when Leon died. It took him a while to figure out where to go from there, what to do, or even to want to do.
I can imagine that was a very difficult time. How close were you and the family to Leon?
Well, we were kids, so our contact was always sustained by things that my father and Leon set up. It wasn't like in their absence we continued the relationship. Although as adults here in Los Angeles, I've run into Leon's daughter, and it was very nostalgic and special, but it wasn't something we sustained either. It was really their friendship, and it was special.
It's amazing. Your face lights up when you talk about your dad. It really does. It's amazing. That's so amazing to see. We've all seen Al Minns again in documentaries. We've seen him on TV. We've seen him in videos. We've read about him. So we all know about Al Minns, this amazing jazz dancer and Lindy Hopper. Can you tell us a bit about Al Minns, the father, at home?
Well, he had a great sense of humor. He could cook. I remember I don't recall where he'd been, but he'd been gone for a few weeks. And I remember he came home one day and I was like, Daddy. And he says, no, my name is Tom. I said, Tom? No, you're my daddy. No, I'm Tom. I'm his twin brother. I'm supposed to meet him here. My mother went along with it. He played at Tom the whole day. And then as the sun was going down, he's like, well, I gotta go now. Tell Al I was waiting for him. And then he left, and then he came back with, I don't know where he'd hidden all these gifts. And then he came back with all this from having been on the road. And I'm like, Uncle Tom. He's like, no, I'm your father. Was Tom here? Carry that jerk out for the whole night. It was much later that they let me in on it. He was very funny. He loved to sing. Sunday morning was my time with him. He would be in the kitchen cooking, and I'll never forget these times. I would sit on the kitchen table and ask him about anything on my mind. and he would answer. He was very, very focused that we knew etiquette. It was very important to him that we knew how to hold a glass, how to sit at a place sitting with multiple forks and knives. We talked about these things. He demonstrated these things. And, you know, I'd be out in the streets playing with my friends and yelling and carrying on. And he'd come out and he'd call me in and he'd say, Denise, don't be common. I mean, the worst thing you could be in my family, in his mind, is common. He had this, he would say things like, I want you to be extraordinary, Denise. I don't want you to be common. He didn't want me to be a dancer either. He he felt like I needed to leave a bigger print on the world. He never said I shouldn't dance. It was his preference that I did not pursue that.
So the question I have for you now is, you mentioned that Almin was a cook. Two questions then. One, was he a good cook, and what sort of things did he cook?
He was an excellent cook. He was a great breakfast cooker. So he made pancakes and biscuits from scratch. He bought us a home with his mother lived downstairs. So breakfast was a big deal. And between my grandmother and mother, they handled all the dinners, but he did omelets and pancakes and biscuits and, you know, stuff he made up, stuff he created.
And another question related to food. It's just good to delve back into those days. A strange interview question, I know. But was there fried chicken and rice and peas ever on the menu?
Oh, God, yeah. Well, you know, his family's from the South. So it wasn't just fried chicken. It was smothered chicken and liver and oxtails and pig feet and mac and cheese and collard greens and cornbread. And okay, end the interview. I'm hungry now. Yeah.
Does anyone else in the family dance?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question because I was at the International Lindy Hop Conference this past fall, and I went into this museum they have there, and there was this big display of my father's stuff, and there was this dance magazine that had the cover, and I looked and I'm like, look, that's me on the cover. And it was
Wow.
me and my younger brother, because it was a spread on Leon and my dad and us as the next generation. And so all of us, you know, my father's and Leon's children, at some point were dancing with him. Then I continued to dance. And now I have 3 sons. My oldest son, who's become an investor, but he danced at one point. My 2 youngest sons, my middle son, Kevin and Wayne, when they made it known to me they wanted to be dancers, I made sure that they would be master dancers. So they're trained in ballet, jazz, tap, hip hop, African, flamenco, salsa. It doesn't matter what you throw at them, they can book the job. Kevin is currently in Texas. He's a teacher, choreographer. He teaches 24 classes a week, and he's choreographing for 3 competition groups. And my youngest, who just graduated Fordham University in New York, he just finished doing a Broadway show that he danced in. It was nominated for 7 Tony Awards. And then he came home and he booked co-starring in a Disney show called Shook, and that's up for an Emmy that we find out about this month. So the legacy continues. Yes, dance is very important.
Excellent.
And,
That's amazing.
before I forget, and Kevin That young man, my second born, he was in an international hip hop competition. They won first place. 2 minutes before the dance was over, he snapped his Achilles, danced through it on stage, and won first place. So I'm like, that's nobody but my father in that boy's life, I swear. And then he, it was like a arduous long-term recovery, like 6 or 9 months. And then he got up and he's been running ever since.
That's an amazing story. And definitely you are your dad's children. Definitely.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Who was your father's favorite band that's in the Savoy?
Count
Or who was
Basie.
his favorite band?
Count Basie. Period.
And how was his feelings? I mean, we've spoken to other dancers from that era. What was his feelings towards people like Whitey?
Yeah. Again, you power through, right? He never complained about him to me. But understand that when I turned 16, I talked my way into college. That's a whole other story, and left home. So at the time that I might have been interested in having those discussions with him, I was gone for the next 4 years. And then when I got out of college, kissed him upside his head and headed to LA to do my own dance, if you will, my own artistic career. So he never talked about in any kind of negative way. I chuckled because I was with Norma at her last birthday party here in Los Angeles. We were at Debbie Allen's, and it was just me and Norma for a moment sitting at the table. And she was once again thanking me for my dad, because she said he revived it. His actions is what revived it for everybody. And she felt like that just doesn't get said enough. And of course, in front of Norma, I'm nothing but, humble. And then she told me a story about how when they went to Brazil, they would wait for, and Frankie was made like, my Whitey was made like the chaperone of everybody. And they would wait for Frankie to fall asleep. And then her and my dad would sneak out the window and party all night. So again, I think, it's one of those things that you look at what the power structure is around you, for better or for worse, and you power through. I mean, I've heard the horror stories, but those stories, if you look into any performer's life during that time, certainly Ray Charles got famously ripped off by his Black manager initially. I mean, it's the game. It's what happens, And I heard all the stuff about him being a thug and this and that, but never from my dad, because I believe, knowing him, he just wanted to dance. And if you're creating that space, he's going to find a way to be in it comfortably, make his money, come home and take care of his family. And that's what he was about.
Could you tell us any stories about fellow band members that you've met, famous artists you mentioned, Duke Ellington and so forth? Did you ever meet any of them?
So, again, I don't remember what country my father was in, but my mother took the notion, every Wednesday night at the Apollo, they had a talent show. And the winner got $25, which at that time was a lot of money when I was a kid. And my mother took the notion, take me to the Apollo. Duke Ellington was playing, which he was another favorite of my dad, second to Count Basie. And I went and I competed and I danced and I won. And so when Duke Ellington says, what is your name, little lady? And I said, oh, my name is Denise Minns. He's like, Denise Minns? Wait a minute, any relation to almonds? And I'm wondering, why would he know that? not making the connection between the record and the person. And I said, yeah, that's my dad. He's like, hey, everybody, this is, and then he makes this big announcement about who my dad was. So I met him. And,
what a way to meet him.
Right. And, but mostly no. I mean, mostly when he went to their homes, it was him and mom, and I was left at home with my older brother to babysit us. We didn't go out that way.
Well, that's amazing. That's such an amazing story to hear how you met Duke Ellington. That's really a treasured story there.
Right.
Now, just a quick question. I guess I should have asked this initially, but let me ask it now. How old was your dad when he first started dancing?
He started dancing on the streets of Harlem when he was about 9 years old. They would about 9 years old. And it was mostly like the Charleston and things like that. He hadn't learned the Linda yet. And they would work the corners. So him and his friends would be on one corner dancing, and when they figured they'd gotten as much money as they're gonna get from that, they'd go to another corner. And he was helping supplement my grandma's income, who had come up north as part of the Great Migration of Blacks escaping the South. And she was a domestic worker. She cleaned people's homes and did prostitutes' hair in the kitchen for 25 cents a head. And my dad danced on corners, and that's how they survived.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I'm not sure.
Another point I want to make is most of my books that I had to have in college about Black history or sociology as it related to Black people were already in my dad's library. He was self-taught. I don't believe he went past 7th grade in his formal education, but he had a thirsty mind to know and understand. And I think it made such a difference to what formed him and informed him that he was traveling all over the world. And it just made him want to know. And he was very articulate. You know, if you listen to his I'm sure you have, to his interviews, you know, you would not think this is someone who didn't go beyond the 7th grade in formal education.
You talked about your work with Debbie Allen. How did that come about?
Again, Kevin, we were in our car. I was driving him home from a rehearsal. He was part of a dance group called the Rhythm Nation. And Debbie was on the radio talking about she's auditioning for new students. And I asked him, did he want to try out? He didn't know who Debbie was, so I told him. And he's like, why not? And so we go, and he got accepted through the audition. And I, at that time, had just opened a business doing fundraising for progressive nonprofit advocacy groups. And the following year, 9/11 happened, and it froze the economy. And so my business was going down the toilet. And I'll never forget it. I had taken Kevin to the Department of Motor Vehicles to take his driver's test. And Debbie walks in that day. Same place. Who would have thought? She plops down next to me and she says, Kevin belongs with me. I said, I agree, but I can't afford the tuition. And she's like, well, come work for me. And that began a 15-year relationship.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm guessing you didn't expect that to happen.
No, but see that year, well, interesting. That first year, being a good parent, I was going to the parent meetings and I was very vocal about fundraising techniques, and I had done some free efforts to help raise money for the academy because it was fledgling and growing. And so she knew, you know, she knew I could fill in the gap, and it worked really well, you know. And after 15 years, she became executive producer of a TV show called Grey's Anatomy, and I was at a point that I could do the job with my eyes closed. I was kind of bored. I was more than kind of bored. And so we parted on good terms. She's there, but not like she used to be. And I'm gone. I remained a consultant for the first 2 years after I left, just to help transition everything to continue being strong. And it's still going strong. And we're still friends. I was just at her house a couple of weeks ago.
What importance do you place on the history of jazz and swing dancing?
The history is extremely important. But what's extremely important is that we tell our own story, because it's being told by white people and it's not always being told truthfully. And credit's being taken that's not due. And you know, it's not just swing, it's jazz as well. It's our music. I mean, there are only a few things that Black people have created that are still in society today. And one of those is our dance, and the other is our music. I don't care if it's Lindy or hip hop, it's ours. And with Lindy, we lost control of it. And it went into the ballroom scene, and it got mechanized to a great degree. And I'm using the term mechanized on purpose. I know exactly what that word means. And it got mechanized because it made it more palatable for people who need to count when they dance. My father never counted. I never counted. You dance the music. It's a whole other thing. So what's important is that we not only tell our own stories and we own it, but that we repossess it and refresh it, because we shouldn't be stuck. Young people today don't want to dress in vintage clothing. They don't. That's not how they dress. Mm-hmm. But how they dressed in those days was how they dressed.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And that's not an error, quite frankly, that we view. I mean, we can't even talk about that era without talking about the pain that we as a people experience. So these kind of there's a stridency that has entered this art that's not appropriate, because it stymies. Am I answering your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, you are.
So I'm not interested in keeping the art where it was. I'm interested in seeing who's taking it forward, who's breaking the rules. I remember my dad talking about how most of the aerials that he created happened out of mistakes. Like, it was a mistake. And then he'd be like, wait a minute, let's work on that. Maybe we can fit it in. People aren't trying to do that anymore. They're not making mistakes. I remember when I was at Harang, and I'll send you the picture of it. I was at Harang and I was talking, and I said, you know, we need, every one of the rooms at Harang is named after one of the great swing ballrooms.
Yes, yes.
I said they need to have a room called the Balls Room, BALLS, where people go with some balls and work out some real dance. So they created a room with a sign called Denise's Balls Room. And I would walk by and there'd be a couple in there working on it, but that's what it should be.
Absolutely.
It should be It should be exciting and challenging, and because it's becoming sterile and codified out of existence.
That's no, absolutely, totally agree with that. If your dad, Al Minns, was around today, how do you think he would view the swing dance scene?
I think he'd be amused. I think he'd be very appreciative of the sincere effort. But I also think he'd have a lot to say to people about free yourself up. Free yourself up. Find the joy in what you're doing, and don't be bogged down. I think he'd be elated at its popularity. But I also think he'd be pulling his hair out, trying to figure out how to engage young Black people in repossessing their art, repossessing this art. Because that was something he talked about. Like, why aren't they? And how do we do it? And it was a preoccupation with him. So as a result, it's become somewhat of a preoccupation with me of how do we do that? And I have some ideas I'm not ready to talk about, but you know, I do know one thing. I do know that, as I've said in the past, if my father had to rely on these camps to learn how to dance, or these socials to learn how to dance, he couldn't have afforded it.
Yes, absolutely.
We would have never had an Al Minns. So we have a financial obligation. We have a financial obligation to do something about that. If we want to honor the elders, that's how he and Norma and Frankie and Sugar and Barbara, that's how they learned. They didn't learn paying money to go to camps. So there shouldn't be a camp, in my opinion, that doesn't have a scholarship program, that's not reaching out to inner city dance schools with Black kids saying, come learn this, and making it something for them. What you can't tell me you honor my dad, you don't honor how he learned. You know, so give those who wouldn't have access. If you want to care about something, do that. That's why I really appreciate a woman here in the States named Valerie Salstrom, who's out of Cleveland, you know, inner city. She's working with those Black kids. And I mean, like, she's working with them whether they continue dancing or not. Once she gets her clutches on them, she's got them. That's it. She's going to see them from point A to point B. I have respect for her. I respect that Judy Pritchard, you know, sends inner city dancers to Sweden once a year. But there's a lot going on here in the States, you know, and we need to not just do it in Europe. The fact that it has to be done in Europe is kind of mind-boggling if you think about it.
Yes, of course.
You know,
of course.
So I think our work is cut out for us if we want to take it beyond lip service. And isn't this, you know, a good discussion for wine and cheese? You know, now we're at a point of we need to take action very seriously, because if you start bringing Black youth into this, they will shoot some artistry and creativity that people will just be excited about. I want people to be excited again, not just, you know, stuck on the past. But what should Lindsay look like in the 21st century? It shouldn't look like what it looked like, and it shouldn't be getting diluted, which in my opinion is what's happening. You know, I mean, there are always a few exceptions that make the rule, but as a general note, you know.
Okay, that's good, strong answer. I like that. What message would you like to convey to the whole global swing dance community about your father's legacy?
My father's legacy is, don't be afraid. Find the joy in your dance, free yourself up, and just dance. Find the joy and creativity and dance. Stop judging yourself. Take some risks. Take some risks. And if you're dancing with a coward, find someone with the same guts you have. You may have to drag them in and teach them from scratch. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Denise, it's been a pleasure. It's really been an absolute pleasure to do this.
I want to say that my father, a general note about my dad is that he never bought into the status quo. Anything about the status quo, he looked at, he examined for himself, and he made his own decisions about it. He grew up in a family of wash your feet Baptists. Yet the music pulled him. The music in Harlem pulled him, and he danced. And he was willing, and my grandmother with him, was willing to lose the embrace of the family as he pursued his passion of dance. And then I have a mom, a Jewish mom, whose family was rebuilding after the Holocaust. They were from Poland, and she too didn't care about the status quo. She went sneaking up to Harlem and met my father. And according to my dad, it was love at first sight. And so I was raised by people who said, question everything. The rules are only the rules for you if they contribute to your life. And where they don't, discard it. And that's not only been my touchstone, but I believe that feeling permeates everything my dad has ever done.
How clearly in were they married?
Yeah.
And when did they get married?
1949. It was illegal in most of the United States.
And what experiences would you say they faced during that time?
My mom's, it was interesting because, so her family totally rejected her. To this day, I don't know them. I met her parents a couple of times, but you know, and my mom, because dad was on the road, she was the one that had to do most of the confronting. So whereas I know that we ran into problems when they were tried to live in a white neighborhood. I don't know all the details. And then we moved to a black section of town. And it's a kind of like a smoldering tolerance, you know? At that time, though, the thrust in the black community, if everyone was very dark-skinned, was to lighten the family. So my dad marrying a white woman and therefore having lighter kids made her more embraced in my family on the black side. Not something I'm proud of, but it's a fact. What she had to deal with was, you know, being in a department store at the checkout stand and me and my sister running over with our little purses that we had picked out for Easter Sunday. And when the in front of her saw us calling her mommy, mommy, you know, turning and, you know, calling her nigger lover, you know, and my mother just, you know, losing it and grabbing both of us and dashing out of the store. Or when I was, you know, in the 4th grade and I was in a segregated school. It was a wonderful school. Quite as a kid, segregation had some good stuff, and I had wonderful teachers who loved us and gave us a sense of mission, but that's another story. And but we came to school and none of our teachers were there. They were all substitute teachers, and I didn't know my mother was white. It never came up in conversation because other people in the neighborhood were as fair-skinned as she was. So I didn't understand race in the 4th grade. And so the woman someone said, "Where's our teacher?" One of the kids said, "Where's our teacher?" And they said, "Oh," the teacher said, her name was Mrs. Harris, of course, and Mrs. Harris said, "Oh, white people like Denise's mother have your teacher in jail because they don't like Negroes like us." That was the first time I ever heard my mother referred to as other. And so I said, "My mother's not white." So I jumped up and I ran out of the classroom and I ran all the way home and I'm crying and I'm a hot mess. And I tell my mother, who was this little lady, I don't know, my father was out of the country at the time, this little lady. And so she takes me, she walks me back up to the school. And when we walk into the classroom, the woman's face was like, "Oh boy." And my mother just walked up to her and slapped her. And took me by my hand and walked into the principal of the school's office. I don't know what was said, but that teacher was not back in school the next day. So, you know, I mean, she powered through.
As we do.
She powered through.
Denise, it's been such an amazing pleasure, really, really has. And I hope it's not the last time. I hope we get to meet in person.
Yes, me too.
I hope we get to meet in person. Have you been to England?
You know, I set up one of the first fundraising operations there in the 90s. Don't even get me started. I was raising money for some different, I've been to London 4 times, but that's about the size of it. I was there in the early 90s. So yeah, but not in the artistic realm, no. So I look forward to getting back on the road once this virus ends. I'm so embarrassed. Well, this virus ends and this crazy person who's running the country into the ground is out of office. Right?
Exactly.
I think not long after that we'll be okay.
So a question not for the interview. Are you going to vote for Trump? Denise, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on a Swingopedia interview tonight. Thank you so much. The whole world, I'm sure, are so intrigued to hear about your own experiences as well as your father, and we'll leave it food for thought. Thank you very much for being part of Swingopedia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.